My presentation is basically going to show you some weird and wacky stuff. I run a research centre at Ravensbourne called LTRC, and we evaluate, implement, and research perceptual technologies. So we're looking post-digital hybrid technologies which actually combine analog and digital affordances to create entirely new literacies and new forms of knowledge. And we believe there's a new economy coming where you actually don't produce so much content anymore, but you actually, the content becomes your perception, and the ability to change your perception becomes paramount. So we're moving away from things like augmented reality to things like sensory adaptation and perceptual augmentation. The 5 sections of the talk are hybrid space, defining it, context engineering, talking a bit about these different ways you can actually adapt your perception, change your consciousness. We're going to do a little bit of stuff on body hacking and reality hacking, and then some of the challenges and implications. A bit of a breakthrough moment for me is I've had a number of out-of-body experiences, and once I tried the Oculus Rift on, I was very much aware that this was a kind of out-of-body experience, in the sense that I became my vision. You know, my body became my vision, and that's quite a lot of the time what happens in a 5-MeO experience or just an out-of-body experience generally. So I'm very much aware that the digital's bleeding into the physical now. We're seeing a lot of the motifs of the digital being inserted into the physical realm, and everything's becoming virtual in a sense. This is an example from architecture where a physical event was captured and then turned into architecture. So an example of what I mean by context engineering, and this is sort of sensory adaptation as well, is that we're able to create entirely new visual systems now. This is a headset that I was using for about a week in the lab, and what it does is it squashes a 360 view taken from a street view camera into 180 degrees along here, and incredibly it only takes about 15 minutes for your brain to adjust to seeing in 360. And you know, what are the use cases if we create this? And it's like your brain's all basically saying, thank you very much, why didn't you do it before? And that's the kind of thing I'm interested in. Oculus Rift has issues with nausea, etc., but this headset doesn't. So that's what I'm particularly interested in design with technology, which technologies work and which don't. And obviously there's people are saying that the next evolution of film is 360, but one of the problems with that is that where do you put the crew? If you're shooting in 360, where do the crew go? Another example of perceptual technology is this one from MIT called the Wristify. And again, it's influencing architecture and perception because what it's trying to do is get away from air conditioning. So this piece of technology effectively heats or cools the body at certain positions, and it effectively changes how hot or cold we think we are. So this is what I mean by perceptual technology. But again, it's cutting edge and it's very effective. This is another piece of perceptual technology, which is actually re-engineering 2 kinds of space, the space of taste and the space of smell. And effectively what happens is when you're eating your food, it plants specific smells on top of that taste. So again, it's creating a whole new range of this experience. I was in Japan for a couple of months last year working in the cyber labs over there, and they're actually doing, I mean, I've been theorizing about this context engineering for some time, but they're actually doing a lot of it already. So let me just give you an example. This is quite astonishing, and they've got some very good results with it. So here we go. Basically what's happening in this demo is you're wearing these glasses and you're shrinking or enlarging your food as you eat it in order to actually either lose weight or, if you're anorexic, eat a normal meal. So again, these things, perceptual technologies which have a real-time effect. Also, if you're wearing glasses, one of the things that's coming is this idea that your display will actually work personally for you, and it will actually adjust to your prescription. So this is again contextual engineering where your context, your need becomes mirrored in reality. A rather more analog version of this is an artist in Berlin who's doing what I call conversation spacification, because everyone entering the party becomes 2 meters tall. And everyone knows that there are certain height-related impressions made in contexts, and this is to subvert that. We also have the ability to become dolphins, for instance, experience the shape of being a dolphin. These experiences are now available. Psychedelic, is it psychedelic? I would say it is. This is also an idea of what we're doing with music. So I'm trying not to just focus on vision, but all the senses, as well as creating new ones. This is an example of, we know the problems with sound now because everything's digital. We are effectively losing the ability to concentrate on music. So this is a pair of headphones that actually forces you to be still in order to hear the music. So again, focusing on the context, not the content. The content's only available if you really augment the context of which you are. And Calvin Harris did the opposite and forced everyone to dance in order to hear the music. So I'll just concentrate on one of the biggest technologies that is affecting all of these possibilities, these field of view technologies, the Oculus being one, which will very rapidly redefine fundamental human experiences in areas like film education, architecture and design. I was actually in Japan looking at the problem of these, specifically men, just tuning out of reality. You know, they get to a certain age and then they just never leave the house. They're plugged into cyberspace, playing games mostly, and that's the end of it. They just don't. They no longer participate in society. And people are talking about the Oculus as if it could be the end of Western civilization, because you can imagine kids having this situation where they put these devices on, and they can see their parents in the distance, but they have the ability just to delete. So it's kind of like, well, how do we solve this problem? And things like the Google Cardboard, which is a $10 version of the Oculus Rift, means these devices are going to go viral very, very quickly. We've also got people hacking Google Cardboard and making their own version, kickstarting it, and sort of beating Google, saying that we've produced a better version of what Google's doing. So it's a very open market. And when you start combining these technologies, I was at the degree show at Ravensbourne recently, and what we had was a guy that actually combined the Leap Motion, which is a motion sensor, with the Oculus Rift. And it was amazing. It was an amazing demo, because as soon as I tried the headset on, I'd been used to being in an Oculus environment, but I'd never had my body in the environment as well. And I was looking at my hands, and my hands were in the virtual space, and I was able to do a very Minority Report into, I was literally another eureka moment. I'm in the space. I'm in the matrix. And that's what's coming. And again, this is the issue, that we've got the ability now to wear body sensors as well as the Oculus and enter these virtual spaces. And let me give you another demo of that. So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, where we're able to actually literally be embodied inside these environments. And you can see how seductive these experiences are going to become. So this is actually the Vive HTC, which is a competitor to the Oculus. Again, it's using the whole context, so you're using these controllers, which are quite cumbersome at the moment, but they're only going to get smaller. And effectively, your living room becomes the game space. So it's, again, this whole matrix idea that's going to turn everything into this virtual space. And how this is working is something, the reason why augmented reality didn't really get a good rep at the start is because the tracking was so bad. And now what we've got is this ability to actually track very closely our entire environment. Let me just show you an example. Basically, this is called parallel tracking and mapping. And what this demo is showing, and this is an old demo now, this is actually showing somebody using his mobile phone just to track the objects on his desk. And while he's tracking the objects on his desk, he's making a 3D model. So it's using computer vision to create a 3D model on the fly. And that's why augmented reality is so good now, because you're able to actually create a 3D object on top of your 3D model, attach whatever you want to that 3D space. So effectively, with things like Google Glass, even though it's now defunct. What we can do is actually create 3D models of everything we're seeing, including people. Obviously, there's lots of issues with that. This is another example of this ability to basically map everything in real time using mobile devices. Google Project Tango is another example. And again, what we can do with that is this kind of thing. It effectively means that the world becomes an interface and it becomes malleable. So this was the this was the old model for augmented reality, where you had these information bubbles, didn't really tie very well to the world, and it didn't really work. But using the parallel tracking and mapping that I've just shown you, you can actually even use something like an iPad to model the world in real time. And once you're modeling the world in real time, you're able to start creating models out of the world in real time. Again, a very psychedelic effect. So the world becomes a collection of malleable 3D models. I'm working with a company called Field in London, and they had a show recently, and I was amazed to see that they've started to look at the aesthetics of these devices, because the Oculus is so ugly. Why not make something a bit different? And what you fast realize is, even if you're quite an introverted person, once you put these devices on, you're actually interacting with the internal space, but there is still an outside world that's interacting with you. And if you're made to look aesthetically interesting, if the gameplay on the internal side is actually made to actually interact with the outside, then you're starting to create this, again, this bi-directional hybrid space, which I find fascinating. So moving on to the perceptual adaptation sensory augmentation, there's a long history of this. Talking to Luciana about this idea of sensory substitution, and we've got the ability now to change the senses in real time. Again, in the 60s, we had some critiques of this idea. And this example I like, the dialogue goggles in '68, basically breaking up your field of view. The movement of the mirrors breaks up the participant's view, which is intended to engineer a novel dialogue. The Decelerator helmet created to actually slow time down in real time, so you can start to see traces of things. You can start to access what's not normally there. We can start to see, like, insects, this ability to actually hack into other systems entirely. This is a great quote which summarizes my talk. We're reimagining what already exists and using perspective to shape reality instead of changing reality itself. So it's this idea, again, of context engineering, no longer needing to make content in a world where we already had too much creation of a content, and the environmental implications. So let's change our perception onto that content. This example is actually reconfiguring the idea of beauty. So we've got a device that actually has interchangeable concave and convex lenses which shrink or expand the user's features. Very cultural. This is another example from the Royal College of Art. Two prosthetics, one with hearing, one with vision. And again, this idea of slowing time down in real time, speeding it up, hacking into reality. Again, another example from Keio University, where I was working. They've discovered that white objects are less heavy, perceptually. So they're using augmented reality to to make things white. So great in the gym when you're trying to do, and that's where they did the tests. So turning the dumbbells white. Adrian Chuk over at City University. Again, I'm very interested in all the other senses, and he's creating mobile devices where you put your tongue in and you can taste the meal that you're going to get in the restaurant. And smell-o-vision as well. He's doing a load of stuff with smell-o-vision. Another brilliant example, sound self. I'm very interested in this idea that we're not just focusing on the future, but a hybrid with the ancient past. And this is a nice example where we're actually using chanting to actually control the game space. Again, trying to create a meditative state through these examples. Going to this entirely new visual system. So this is a new way of mapping. Berg created these maps of Manhattan where you can see the overview and your local view at the same time. So it's this idea of within one field of view to be both in the world and to see yourself in it. The power of looking through and occupying your own field of vision. So this macroscopic idea. And this idea in the museums now, we can actually go, just by walking, we can walk from the painting to the underdrawing, just from that navigation. So again, this idea that the world is becoming an interface and it's becoming bidirectional. Also working with a company called Mindplay, and they're transforming cinema by enabling mind control devices, brainwave detectors, to actually look at how an audience is feeling about a film and actually changing the film accordingly to how they've got a brilliant demo, which is somebody trying to chase, you're trying to chase a robber, your bag's just been stolen. If you concentrate hard enough, you'll catch the robber. If you don't, then you fall over at certain points in the film. And this, again, this idea of creating new senses. This is a belt that we wore in the lab for 3 weeks. If you wear it, it tells you where magnetic north is with these magnets. You can feel where magnetic north is. After 3 weeks, you take the belt off and you have that as an entirely new sense. So it's like a permanent new sense that you create through the technology. And as McLuhan says, we shape our tools and thereafter they shape us. Another brilliant example, shame I don't have audio for this, but I'll just run slightly through it, is this idea of body hacking. Obviously, again, huge implications. I'll come to the implications towards the end of the talk. But this is, again, quite an old demo, but it's fascinating. So what we're doing is actually tricking the brain. So what the basic demo is that we've got this, we've got the headset on, and we're looking at ourselves through 2 cameras, and the cameras are placed behind us. And because there's no peripheral vision in the glasses, our brain's going, where am I, where am I? And actually our brain's looking at us from behind. And we immediately think we're sitting behind ourselves. So it's immediate out-of-body experience created through the technology, and it's incredibly easy to do. Obviously he's giving extra cues to actually trick the brain even further. And the next experiment, he actually swaps his vision with somebody else and starts shaking hands. So he's wearing the other person's vision and shaking hands with himself. And his arm goes totally numb because his brain's going, what the hell's going on? So again, what are the implications for these technologies? How dangerous are they? How neuroplastic is the brain? I would argue it's entirely neuroplastic. Again, this is in Japan. They've got systems called teleexistence. And this is me in the lab. And what we're doing is we're actually wearing a headset and gloves, and we're actually able to enter the body of a robot. So you're looking at your hands and you've actually got a robot hands, and you're like, what the hell? And then you look to your right, and then you're sitting next to yourself in this body. So this is me sitting next to myself, and then I'm literally, you don't know where you are. And this idea that the virtual now is entering the physical. Virtual arms can be extended to touch and feel remote objects that are unreachable in the real space. And again, 20 years ago, Professor Inami, who I was working with out there, he was strapping a third-person camera, so he was looking at himself from behind while he went down when he was skiing. So he could literally see himself in real time as he was skiing, just to see how bad his technique was. So I love this idea of being able to, because our consciousness isn't in our heads, it's not behind our eyes. As soon as you leave your body, your consciousness isn't in your head, and it's an incredible release, and it's the ultimate gift you can have. And now, why do we have to take drugs to do that? We can do that with technology. And actually, we're getting to the point where there's going to be personalized drones. What scares me is the more famous you are, the more drones will be following you around. But again, the issues, massive issues. A student at Ravensbourne created a project where he attached a drone to an Oculus Rift, and the eye became an input and an output device, and moving his head around meant he could actually control the drone. Again, implications. The eye might not necessarily want or need to be an input and an output device. Again, another analog version of this, Julius von Bismarck in Berlin placed a camera in this balloon above him, and literally was walking around Berlin, having out-of-body experience and looking rather dashing at the same time. Another example, another project, but again, these things, everyone's getting into it. Very simple experiment where they just swap the inputs on the Oculus. So you're literally looking through somebody else. So you're swapping your consciousness with your partner, and you touch yourself at the same time. You tell your partner where you're touching yourself on the body, and you literally, if you do it, if you actually align, you track perfectly, then you have the very real impression that you're in that person's body. And then we've got the whole implications from neuroscience about mirror neurons. I think this is going to be an engine of empathy creation. If you want to know what it's like to be in a disabled body, even from an accessibility point of view, going around London, strapping this view on for the day just to see how difficult their life is. What does it mean? Because I don't know whether you know about the idea of mirror neurons, but it basically means that when you watch somebody else do something, you're triggering the same neural networks in your head as if you're doing it yourself. So that's why they say playing tennis, if you get a close-up of somebody playing tennis, you're actually triggering the same neural networks. If you've played tennis before, you have to have played tennis yourself to build the neural network. They've got brilliant simulations now showing you what it's like to be inside the mind of a schizophrenic. I highly recommend this demo, which I don't have time to show. Again, other examples where they're simulating the LSD experience. Also showing what it's like to be a child, to be at the size, that sort of size of a child, a 2-year-old child, looking through the world of a 2-year-old child. And one of my friends, Mark Farid, is putting together a project called Seeing Eye, and he's rather insane because what he wants to do is wear the Oculus Rift for 28 days straight, and that includes when he's sleeping, and to look through somebody else. So he's going to listen to somebody else's life and look through their eyes for 28 days, waking and sleeping, eating the same food as them, doing the same exercise, obviously on the spot. If he goes running, he'll be running on a treadmill. He'll be in a studio where people can actually watch. And the big implications are, he's trying to work out, will his own identity start to be submerged? Will he start to lose his own identity over the 28 days? Clearly it's never been done before. A lot of people think it can't be done. I'm one of them because of the motion sickness. But that is Seeing Eye, again, worth checking out. And we've got a massive debate. I'll put my Facebook link up after this. I use it as a blog for all these ideas. And Olaf Blanca, he's done some research to actually detect that we can actually produce out-of-body experiences with a small amount of electricity in the right angular gyrus will reliably create an out-of-body experience. And I put this up on one of my cover photos and had 800 replies from various experts around the world discussing what this means. What does it mean for consciousness? What does it mean for the materialists? Because they love this kind of stuff. And there's again history on this. The passenger helmet uses a weak electromagnetic field to create things like out-of-body experiences. Hacking the sense of self, that's what I'm particularly interested in. And now we've got devices, again, Luciano, we were talking about this yesterday, that you can wear when you're asleep, and the ability for the device to detect when you go into a REM sleep, and actually to apply a small amount of electricity to your frontal lobes, minimal, no damage, but it will trigger your memory, so it will wake you up in that dream, and you'll start to have a lucid state. No problem. They've discovered this apparent switch in the brain that turns consciousness off. Again, I don't want to hear this stuff because I don't believe it. But that's apparently what's out there. I'm going to rush through this bit now. But the challenges and implications, obviously there's a big backlash. If we've got these devices that enable us to create anything we want in front of us. So remember I showed you earlier this idea to create a 3D model of everything. That effectively means that we will be able to digitally impose any view onto the world. It'll be a personalized view. If you don't like men, you can delete them. And you'll be a tag to say there was a man here, just avoid this space, or put a gorilla there instead. Google are patenting this gesture with their ridiculous device. They own that gesture. How can you do that? They don't allow it in Europe. These images are, if you stare at them for, I think, up to 30 minutes, they have a 3-month perceptual effect on your visual system. So please don't look at them. Stellark's saying it again, very, rightly so. The body has limits. What are these limits? We need to do the research. This guy had stereoblindness. He went and saw a 3D film. All of a sudden, his visual system just clicked into place. He could see normally. Tetris fixes the lazy eye. Your brain no longer knows the difference between emoticons and emotion. So when you're smiling in reality, your brain sees that as one thing. When you see a smiley face on an email, your brain sees it as the same thing as a real smile. So to summarize, we need to take advantage of the plasticity of the brain and the plasticity of the senses to evolve perception and cognition. We need to learn much more about the human perceptual system and the interaction between different sense modalities. And don't create these technologies without a human need. This is one of the main points of my talk. And there's a new economy coming out of context augmentation rather than content augmentation. Thank you very much.